I always thought my father's ranch would be the last place on earth untouched by greed. It had been in our family for nearly 3 generations, a quiet spread of land just outside our small town, with rolling hills, a creek that cut through the back pasture, and an old barn my father rebuilt with his own hands. When he passed, he didn't leave me much money, but he left me something better: the ranch, and the responsibility to protect it. I had barely settled into the house when the first strange letter arrived. It was from the local HOA, an HOA I wasn't a member of, an HOA my father had never signed anything for, and an HOA that had absolutely no jurisdiction over our land. Yet the letter spoke to me like they owned the place. Vague mentions of future development, community upgrades, and an upcoming project that will benefit the area. I shrugged it off and tossed it into a drawer. But the next morning I woke up to the sound of engines. I stepped outside and froze. Bulldozers, survey crews, trucks loaded with equipment, and a group of HOA board members standing near my fence line like they were inspecting their property. I marched straight toward them. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. A tall man with a clipboard turned around as if he'd been expecting me. "Good morning. We're beginning Phase 1 of the Hillside Golf Resort. Your land is part of the approved development plan." I stared at him in disbelief. "My land? I didn't approve anything." He flashed a tight smile. "Actually, the board voted on it last month. It's already been ratified." There was only one problem with his story. I wasn't part of their HOA. My land wasn't within their boundaries, and no one, not me, not my father, had ever signed anything giving them power here. I demanded paperwork. They refused. I told them to get off the property. They insisted that construction proceeds today. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. By noon, they had already cut a line through the back field, marking where they claimed the fairway would go. I chased off the workers twice, but they kept coming back, each time pretending they had legal authority. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a coordinated plan. That night, I sat on the porch with my father's old hat in my hands, replaying every conversation, every letter, every strange hint I'd ignored. This wasn't going to stop on its own. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. And I wasn't backing down. The next morning, I walked the entire property line before sunrise. Fresh tire marks cut across the dirt, and orange survey flags dotted the grass like an infection. It made my blood boil. This land was my father's legacy. And now it looked like the HOA had slapped their claim on it overnight. I didn't know much about legal battles, but I knew one thing for sure. They couldn't just take my land. Not legally. Not quietly. That's when I decided to strike back. My first stop was the county records office. The clerk, an older woman named Mrs. Whitman, pulled up the files and frowned at the screen. "Honey, your ranch isn't under any HOA. Never has. Been." She clicked through, several screens squinting. "There's no deed change, no annexation documents, nothing. Your land is completely independent." "Then how are they building on it?" I asked. She sighed like she'd seen this kind of thing before. "Sometimes HOAs push their boundaries, unofficially. They start construction first, then try to force owners to comply afterward." So it was exactly what I feared. A land grab. She printed out every document I needed, original property lines, maps, zoning confirmations. I left that office with a folder thick enough to take on an army. My next stop was the sheriff's department. I demanded they remove trespassers from my land. The deputy listened politely, but after a phone call with the HOA president, his attitude changed. "Well, now it seems the HOA believes they have a development agreement." "A development agreement signed by WHO?" I snapped. He didn't answer. That's when it hit me. The HOA wasn't just bold. They had friends in the right places. Frustrated, I returned home to find even more workers crawling across the ranch. They had unloaded pipes, cement bags, and even temporary fencing. One of them was marking the ground with spray paint. I marched right into the middle of their work zone. "Everyone stop right now. You're trespassing." Most of them froze, but the construction supervisor, a stocky guy with a radio clipped to his vest, stepped forward. "Sir, the HOA authorized us. If you have an issue, take it up with them." "I am, starting with you leaving my property." He crossed his arms. "We're on schedule. We're not stopping." I knew arguing wasn't enough, so I walked to my truck, grabbed my phone, and started recording everything: the equipment, the workers, the flags, the lines they were cutting across my land. They hated that. The supervisor yelled for me to stop filming, but I kept going. "This is evidence," I said loudly. "And every inch you step today is going into a lawsuit." By the end of the day, they had pulled most of the equipment back onto the road, clearly spooked. The HOA might have been confident, but the workers didn't want legal trouble. It was a small victory, but I knew the real war hadn't even started yet. By the time the third day rolled around, I realized something important. The HOA wasn't acting with confusion or carelessness. They were moving with confidence, like they believed they were untouchable. And people only act that way when they're hiding something big. So I decided it was time to dig deeper. I started by visiting a few neighbors who lived inside the HOA's official boundary. Most of them were hesitant to talk, like the HOA had their hands wrapped around everyone's throat. But an older man named Bill finally opened up. "You're not the first one they've tried this with," he said, motioning me inside. "Last year, they accidentally expanded the community park into private land." The owner fought back, but somehow the HOA produced a document saying he'd agreed to it. He swore he never signed anything. "Forged paperwork?" I asked. Bill gave me a grim nod. "Wouldn't surprise me." That was the first real confirmation that my situation wasn't unique. It was a pattern. I thanked him and headed home, but I wasn't halfway back when I noticed 2 HOA board members standing near my gate again, pretending to inspect the road. When they saw me, they didn't even look guilty. One of them, a woman named Linda, smiled too confidently. "Just ensuring everything is moving according to plan," she said. "What plan?" I asked coldly. "The golf resort development," she replied. "You'll see the benefits soon enough." That smugness was the final straw. I decided to search for the HOA's development permits myself. If they had approval, it would be in county records, but nothing had shown up when I checked earlier. Still, I needed to be sure. So that evening I drove to the county offices again. The clerk, Mrs. Whitman, helped me dig through every newly filed document from the past month. 2 hours in, we found something: a boundary adjustment request, filed by the HOA but stamped, denied by the county. It clearly stated that the HOA had no legal authority to expand onto my land, yet they were building anyway. My stomach twisted. They were breaking the law on purpose, hoping I wouldn't catch on until it was too late. But what I found next nearly made my heart stop. Attached to the rejected paperwork was a copy of a supposed agreement with a landowner, someone with my exact name. But the signature wasn't mine. The handwriting was sloppy, the date mismatched, and worst of all, my father's signature was forged too. They had forged documents to make it look like he'd agreed before he died. That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was uncovering a full-blown conspiracy. And if the HOA thought they could forge my father's name and get away with it, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The night I discovered the forged signatures, I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out, illuminated under a single lamp. My father's name, scratched sloppily across a fake agreement, burned into my mind like a branded scar. They hadn't just trespassed on my land, they had insulted my father's memory. And for that, there would be consequences. By morning, my plan was ready. I started by calling a property rights attorney named Mason Reed, a man known in the county for taking down corrupt associations. When I showed him the forged documents, he didn't even try to hide his reaction. "Oh, they're done," he said with a grin. "This is felony-level forgery. And building on your land with no jurisdiction? That's trespassing, fraud, and civil rights violations. We're going to bury them." For the first time in days, I felt hope. The next step was gathering more evidence. Over the next week, Mason and I collected drone footage of their machinery entering my land, photos of the destroyed pasture lines, videos of workers admitting the HOA hired them, maps proving my land wasn't in their boundaries, emails leaked by a sympathetic neighbor showing HOA board members discussing the takeover plan. We built a case strong enough to shake the entire town. When the lawsuit was filed, the news spread fast. The HOA board members suddenly stopped smirking. The same sheriff's deputy who refused to help earlier now avoided making eye contact. HOA members began resigning quietly, terrified their names might be dragged into the scandal. But the real showdown came 2 weeks later during the emergency town hearing. The room was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder whispering as I took the stand with my attorney. The HOA president, Mr. Connolly, sat across the room, sweating through his expensive suit. My attorney placed the forged agreement on the table. "Mr. Connolly," he said loudly, "can you explain why this document contains not only my client's forged signature, but also the forged signature of his deceased father?" Gasps echoed through the room. Connolly stammered. We were told the paperwork was legitimate." But Mason cut him off. "By who?" "Because the county rejected your expansion request, and you proceeded anyway. You knowingly built on land you did not own." It only got worse for them. Dozens of residents came forward, sharing stories of similar HOA intimidation. A full investigation was ordered. By the end of the hearing, construction on my ranch was officially shut down, and criminal charges were recommended for forgery and illegal land seizure. 3 months later, the court ruled in my favor. The HOA was forced to pay damages. Every structure they built on my land had to be removed. Multiple board members were removed and charged. They tried to steal my ranch. They tried to steal my inheritance. They even tried to rewrite history. But I fought back, and I won.